everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Solidarity Friday, coming out February 5, 2021. Kyle and I are here to discuss all sorts of fun things going on in the world of psychedelia. How are you doing today, Kyle?
Good, Joe. How are you doing? We got a nice dump here on the East Coast, so still trying to shovel and remove some snow.
Did you say it was waist deep?
Yeah, I think like some areas where like the drift were. I mean, definitely in my area in New Jersey, well up past my knees. So probably definitely more than 2 feet.
Yeah. All right. So before we get to dig in here, let's plug our class and one other thing, and then we can start rolling. So there are still spots open for our Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists course that starts up in March. Does it start up in like March 12 or something like that?
March 11, Thursday. So 2 times,
March
2
11th
p.m.
to
and
Thursday.
then it's 7 p.m. Eastern.
Great. Yeah. So folks from Europe, Americas, and Australia can all join. So we'd love to have you. I think we even have a student from Bahrain, which is really interesting. So there's even Middle Eastern interest. It's heating up, and doctors are getting brave enough to spend money on education. It's really cool. Anyway, so we have that going on. You can learn about that at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And then if you want to leave us a small monthly donation at Patreon, it's just patreon.com/psychedelics today. And you can leave as small as a $2 donation there per month, and we would very much appreciate it. All right, let's dig into the news. So probably one of the more exciting releases is around Mass General Hospital. So this is a big hospital in Boston, one of the more prestigious Massachusetts hospitals. We've got friends that work there, and they seemingly signed a deal with Atai Life Sciences. So some sort of, clinical place where doctors can actually research these things actively in partnership with Atai and some of Atai's partners. And so it seems really interesting.
Yeah.
Did you have any kind of takeaways in particular from this article, Kyle?
No, just exciting to see more of these centers pop up at, really well-known established institutions. I feel like that just helps with normalizing the subject and research. And the center is going to be called the Center for Neuroscience of Psychedelics. So that's a cool name. And exciting that things are coming to the Boston area. I know that feels like it's going to be a hot spot.
Yeah, totally. Like it's certainly a major hub for development on stuff like this. So they helped create Leary and Albert. So let's hope we can create a whole mess more of really influential folks and really cool developments on drugs. So a quote here from Gerald Rosenbaum, who's a psychiatrist at Mass General. And this article is on bostonglobe.com. He says, I knew about psychedelics in the way that most physicians did, which was sort of the perception of them as recreational drugs or drugs that were banned from research for decades, he said. As I started to learn more, I realized there was an opportunity here that we have let go undeveloped for decades. And yeah, that's the a really crux thing. Next line here in the article, the research center is focused on a phenomenon called neuroplasticity, or the ability of brain cells to change. So that's pretty neat. Yeah, Rosenbaum goes on to say, there seems to be a period of time where it is easier to establish new habits, ostensibly after a psychedelic experience. And you want to exploit that in the week, maybe 2 weeks immediately after the psychedelic event. Yeah. And, what's interesting here is it says Mass General and Atai Life Sciences are not disclosing the terms of the deal. I wouldn't be surprised if we can kind of sneak our way around and find out that info, because that would be good to know. Yeah. So I guess that's good. It's a little, I don't know exactly. I guess this is just the nature of the beast, right? Like on one hand, I want to kind of like caution against this over psychiatry or over medicalization of these things. But, it's kind of just inevitable that big organizations are going to partner, especially like a hospital with different pharma groups. So, I'm hopeful. I hope it works out. I really hope, the drug war thing doesn't get lost in this whole discussion. But yeah, I'm optimistic. This is, again, world-class hospital, and I'm hopeful to see some really cool projects coming out of it, and especially with some of our friends that are there. Like, that's going to be really neat to kind of have a little bit of inside dirt here and there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I guess it helps to validate, these substances and to get them out there, right? So I think having them at well-established institutions and doing the research is important. So, it's catch-22.
Mitigation on backlash too. So a lot of people fear that folks like you and I in the psychedelic culture at large might destroy this whole medicalization thing by perhaps being too reckless, making regulators nervous. But I think, because a huge money company like Atai and Mass General are working on this, and there's so many other big institutions, that this is the kind of ballast that would resist any kind of backslide, into like a deepening of the drug war. So particularly around psychedelics. So, that's one of my thoughts. Like, this is a nice way to say, okay, we can't really go backwards from here. It's only like science is going forward. We're not as afraid as we were before. If you and I talked about spooky things to them, perhaps they would be nervous, but who knows? It's a topic for another day. Cool. So next article here, marijuanamoment.net, came out, 5 days ago from when we're recording this, but title of the article, Psychedelic Mushroom Bills Filed in Florida and Connecticut as Movement Expands to Multiple States. So, this Representative Michael Grieco, Grieco, Democrat in Florida, filed the Florida legislation on Thursday, which would establish a legal psilocybin model similar to the Oregon initiative. It also seeks to deprioritize criminal enforcement against a wide range of psychedelic plants and fungi. So
Sweet.
It sounds like they're bundling in decrim nature type thing with kind of a legalization for therapy bill, which is interesting. Optimistic. There's a ton of war vets in Florida, right? A ton of low income folks. So this is going to be a really important state. Like, Oregon's a really, really, really small state. Florida has a lot of people relative to Oregon.
Yeah.
So just like population wise, like, it's a really great state to have this available in. And I'm hopeful, hopefully we get it in before they're underwater. But
yeah, they say here that Florida has one of the highest prevalence rates of mental illness among adults in the nation. That's interesting. And they're also saying here, if approved, the Department of Health would be responsible for implementing regulations to allow people 21 and older to access psilocybin at a licensed facility where they would undergo therapeutic sessions in a clinical setting. And an advisory board would be established within the department to make regulatory recommendations. And I wonder if it's kind of following like Oregon's lead there. I know in the bill, Measure 109, they talk about, psilocybin services. And it sounds like some of that can be outside clinical, right? At like a retreat center, that would be a psilocybin service provider.
So the clinics would be able to provide kind of pseudo non-clinical service. Well, it would be still in a clinical environment, but it's like you don't necessarily need certain indications to get the treatment.
Right.
Like, I'm curious. I think it's like, one center fits all, but really, this stuff is still really in flux, protean, if you will. And in Florida, like, that's a really interesting catchphrase around 21 plus. Like, only those 21 and above can get the treatment they need. Like, that seems a little wacky, but I think that language is just in there to kind of get around public resistance. But, let's see what happens.
And it sounds like for the decrim bill, it's 18 and older for non-commercial planting, cultivation, purchasing, transporting, and distribution.
Oh, wow. They're actually adding in provisions where you can buy and cultivate, like, legally?
I don't know. It just says to accomplish the latter goal, which I'm guessing is the decriminalization. The bill says the state law enforcement department, quote, shall make the investigation and arrest of persons 18 years of age or older engaged in non-commercial planting, cultivating, purchasing, transporting, distributing, engaging in practices with or possessing entheogenic plants and fungi, one of the lowest enforcement priorities.
Cool. I want to read this quote here from the politician that put this in. So Florida does not have to be the last state to catch up with science every time, Grieco said in a press release. Between medical marijuana and climate change, our state seems to never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. So quite the phrasing. The science regarding psilocybin is real, cannot be ignored, and soon will be a universally accepted form of treatment in the United States. Next up here, veterans and veteran organizations should be watching closely on behalf of folks suffering from addiction, PTSD, and depression. I recognize that I have authored a very ambitious 59-page bill, but the conversation needs to start somewhere, and I am ready to work with both my Republican and Democrat colleagues to create a framework designed to help those patients who need it. Like in Florida, like the veteran population being so huge, like it has to be really well known that a lot of VA patients, Veterans Administration patients, aren't really happy with the service they're receiving, especially if, they're just doing like med checks and SSRIs and not much therapy, which it's kind of hard to get a veteran into talk therapy very often, like that's kind of a generalization, but it's also kind of true based on most of the veterans I know. So I think this is really cool. Now, Connecticut, Representative Josh Elliott and 4 other legislators are looking to create a task force responsible for studying the medical benefits of psilocybin. You all know that one. So that's really cool. So a state level research panel. So that bill is much more limited in scope, according to Marijuana Moment. The text of the legislation calls for the general statuses be amended to establish a task force to study the health benefits of psilocybin. That's really cool. So, that's optimistic. I'm hopeful there. So not too much more to say on the Connecticut one.
Yeah, I'm actually on the bill that was proposed, and it pretty much just states that it's less than a page. The
joke about Connecticut I saw this morning came up on Instagram. I'm really a fan of this kind of smaller band Goose right now from Connecticut, and their jam band. The meme was there's more jam bands in Connecticut than poor people. And, while that's very much not true at all, it was just kind of funny because there's just so many jam bands there. And it's kind of this, wealthy state in a lot of ways. There's just a lot of wealth in Connecticut. Yeah. Probably a lot of psychedelic use as a result of that wealth and free time and privilege. So thus the jam bands, my guess. Anyway, anything else more on this Florida or Connecticut thing, Kyle?
No, I think it just is interesting to see more states become more interested in this topic and, kind of field. And it just, I guess, makes me wonder what the field's going to look like. Like if, Oregon passed, it's going to be exciting to see what they develop in the next 2 years. If something like this could pass in Florida, I think it really opens up for more opportunity, and what type of opportunities will start to emerge that we're not even really aware of, right? Because everybody was really thinking like, kind of super clinical route. And, reading through the Oregon bill, it does seem it's open that maybe non-clinical people could get involved. You don't necessarily need to meet a clinical diagnosis to have an experience. And, I think that kind of shifts the landscape a little bit.
Right. Totally. And I think the interesting thing is politics is regularly about gambling, right? Like, what is going to be politically popular, possibly make a big difference, or get me reelected. And it's kind of a weird political calculus that people have to make. And the fact that politicians in these states are willing to put their name on the line and say, hey, I believe in this. I think you should too. Like that's a pretty big deal. Like they're spending their political capital, whereas years ago it would have been maybe like, let's stop the Iraq war. Now it's let's, get these people treatment with psilocybin. And that's really cool progress for sure.
Yeah, it's even crazy. In that article, it just briefly mentioned about New Jersey also trying to submit a bill, which passed. I don't think it officially passed and signed. It's not into law.
Something happened. I forget what happened there, but that was cool.
They're stalled with their legalization. Murphy still hasn't signed the bill there, which is kind of crazy. But just slow moving New Jersey. But I was surprised to even see that. Last minute bill being proposed just kind of snuck it into the decriminalization of marijuana, sneaking in this like bringing psilocybin down to a misdemeanor charge versus a felony, which
right. Because nobody, the bills are too big that nobody reads the whole thing. They're just like, all right, cool. Let's jam this thing in.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens. Yeah. All right. Well, enough about that. Next up, neuroscience. This is on scipost.org. I think it was published on the journal Neuroimage originally. This is a study, Carhart Harris, Andrea Lupin, Leo Roseman, David K. Menon, Manuel Stamakis, and a few others. But the title of this article on SciPost, Neuroscience Study Indicates that LSD frees brain activity from anatomical constraints. And like the title of the article, the paper in Neuroimage is LSD alters dynamic integration and segregation in the human brain. I'll read a couple highlights here from ScienceDirect.com. LSD untethers functional connectivity from the constraint of structural connectivity. Well, let's debrief on these after I read them all. Increase small worldness of brain networks predict LSD-induced ego dissolution. LSD has time-specific effects on brain networks, integration and segregation. LSD increases the complexity of segregated brain states. Results bridge pharmacodynamics, subjective experience, and brain dynamics. Yikes. All right. So that's a lot of big terms there. Yeah. So I think one of the big takeaways I read in the other one, SciPost, was essentially saying, traditionally without drugs, the things that wire together, fire together. And that's kind of cliche at this point to say that. But
yeah, I have this quote here if you want me to read it.
Sure.
Says typically, quote, neurons that fire together wire together. So even kind of coming back to what they're doing at Mass General with the neuroplasticity, that quote usually, or that phrase usually gets coupled in there. But the researchers found that LSD decoupled the relationship between structural and functionally connectivity, indicating the brain activity is less constrained than usual by presence or absence of an underlying anatomical connection under the influence of the substance. We know that the brain structure has a large influence on the brain function under normal conditions. Our research shows that under the effects of LSD, this relationship becomes weaker. Function is less constrained by structure. This is largely the opposite of what happens during anesthesia.
Interesting. The opposite of what happens under anesthesia. I like that comparison. Yeah. Like, are you very awake or are you very asleep? Yeah. So, I think this is important in terms of like incremental science, but this article didn't really like blow my socks off. Like we definitely need to know this kind of stuff as we get more and more familiar with how to manipulate the brain. But yeah, I don't know. Like there's some level of me getting a little bored with neuroscience, and perhaps that's Lenny rubbing off on us. But it's like, what? What are you really saying? Like at a certain point, like it seems to me to be pretty clear that we don't really have a firm understanding of what consciousness is, what mind is. The safe generalization saying mind is like diffused throughout the body, like that's just a safe thing to say. But we have a lot of stuff suggesting that the mind is beyond the brain in a lot of different ways, and a lot of Groff's anecdotal reports suggest that. And if we're not...
Penfield too, right? I think that
Penfield,
quote...
Wilder Penfield. Yeah, beyond the brain came from him. Famous neuroscientist, neurosurgeon. And that was his conclusion at the end of the day, prodding and poking around people's brain. What did he got famous for separating someone's corpus callosum so that they stopped having seizures or something. Yeah. And, there's a lot more there. Like he poked around in a lot of people's brains and did a lot of really interesting research. And, yeah, like I was listening to this philosopher, psychologist, Daniel Robinson. You and I have both been listening to him a lot, but he had this, he gave us essentially like a rundown of the historicity of phrenology and like its proponents. And this is like, you will be good at, engineering because, this part of your skull is big. or like that part of your nose is small, so therefore you're going to be good at something. So like it's kind of the precursor to neuroimaging research. And from what I understand, there has been some major issues in neuroscience. Like we had that article the other day talking about how studies, when replicated, or really similar studies having wildly different results and interpretations, or like you show these images to 20 different neuroscientists, they're going to give you very different stories. So it's like, yes, we have pictures of the brain and that's good. And we can see what's happening metabolism wise. But to say things about it at this stage in science, like, especially as it relates to defining consciousness and mind, seems immature. Certain aspects of cognition for sure, certain aspects of memory, totally, and abilities, totally, but, not mind, not consciousness. Like, we don't even have a good definition of those to be able to say that kind of thing.
Right. And I'm just coming back to this little paragraph here on SciPost, and it just had me thinking about our episode with Dr. Matthew Johnson, having this conversation, right? Like the neuroscience might help with like the softer problems of consciousness. But yeah, I think it's going to be really hard to, I guess, use some of these studies and substances to, I guess, figure out that harder problem of consciousness. But yeah, right here in the article, it says consciousness is believed to involve the integration in multiple segregated brain networks and their subnetworks. And the researchers sought to better understand how these patterns of brain connectivity varied over time under the influence of LSD. But just interesting, consciousness is believed So just coming back to like Matt's comments here, like we don't even have a clear definition. It's being used in so many different ways when I guess different communities use that word.
William James here. This is just a really quick quote I picked up. James came to understand. Well, no, that's not a great one. I'll get a better one. Yeah, like William James was a really important thinker on consciousness. So our normal waking consciousness is but one special type of consciousness, whilst all about it, parted from it by the filmiest of screens, there lie potential forms of consciousness entirely different. No account of the universe in its totality can be final, which leaves the other forms of consciousness quite disregarded. I think that was from Varieties of Religious Experiences, justifying why we should be doing research into all of these different states. Like I think he was really interested in mystical states and nitrous oxide at the time. It would be really cool if he had mescaline. I don't know if he did or not. Do you?
I don't think so. Could be wrong about that. I know he was really into nitrous, but I don't know if he explored with any of the other ones.
Yeah. I had some time with nitrous a few months ago, and I was like, this is actually really, as debaucherous and weird as it is, it's also like really interesting because you can actually like have some interesting thoughts in there. And I remember like one story, like he thought he had the secret of the universe, like understanding the meaning of life. And I think the line was the smell of, he was able to write it down somehow, and he came out and he was like, oh God, what is this? The smell of petroleum pervades or something like that. It was like his big takeaway. So he's like, not necessarily relevant here, but doesn't mean it wasn't relevant there. But I really think he was saying that consciousness is kind of like a process. It's like kind of like an epiphenomenon. But, does it have reality? Maybe. But defining what it is, it seems like science will have to start approaching metaphysics. Science doesn't like approaching metaphysics. So people like to just neatly reject the spooky and weird. Like, oh, okay. Like, sure, you saw DMT elves. Great. Like you saw DMT elves while smoking DMT and in your near-death experience. Oh, that's cute. Whatever. It doesn't mean anything. Versus, isn't that fucking interesting? The two of these wildly different experiences, one pretty safe, one pretty dangerous, had very similar results. Or like, Lenny, and we were talking about this guy that came back with, after a session, understanding how the wings of birds worked really well. Like just crazy stuff. What does it feel like to be a lion? And you can understand like stuff that you would never have access to traditionally in your day-to-day of being an office worker. So like, what does it mean that we can have all these wild experiences? I think the implications are huge. And it shows that, yes, science is great. We're progressing medicine. Awesome. But we're not asking perhaps more important questions about who we are, why we're here. What are we supposed to be doing while we're here? Stuff like that.
Yeah, maybe that's because it's hard to, I guess, like quantify and measure, right? Those questions.
It's a lot sloppier than like
yeah.
positivistic science. Totally. Like you did this study, sample size of 80, you got these results with this percentage of them. Cool. Like nice, clean, neat. Philosophy is not so nice, clean, and neat. Metaphysics aren't, so simple. Yeah. So it goes to like, what is psyche? The psyche is vast. The psyche probably transcends your body. Like in my experience, that seems right.
My experience as well. Yeah.
So I'm sure plenty of you out there listening would agree too. But what more can we say beyond that? With good with good confidence, like it's a little tricky.
Yeah. I kind of like this last quote here.
Mm-hmm.
From, I believe it's from Loopy. In particular, the mind is never static and neither is the brain. We are increasingly discovering that when it comes to the brain function and its evolution over time, the journey matters just as much as the destination.
I thought that was funny that they put that in there.
Yeah, I think that's important to just like stay curious and that it's always shifting, it's always changing. And even though we might have some of this hard evidence that points to like maybe quote unquote facts, we are still at an early stage in neuroscience and the technology that's there. And, I guess, how do we appreciate the journey and, just become more curious about it? And I think that kind of comes back to maybe some of James with his radical empiricism and kind of curiosity, like how can we study experience with a little bit more of that curiosity and maybe, I guess, like I think it was from Robinson's lectures, just talking about like how do you even study it without some of your frameworks from before? How do you really study experience without even bringing in already what you know? That seems really hard, but I think, a certain level of curiosity to just suspend any sort of judgment and expectation.
Mm-hmm. So I guess long and short, we have a long way to go. I'm grateful for all the scientists that sacrifice so much to do this work. It's not easy to be a scientist the way a lot of these people are. So I'm not trying to give y'all shit. I'm saying thank you.
No, it's exciting.
Let's expand it. Let's start talking metaphysics. Like I know a lot of you might not want to do that and it's potentially career suicide, but let's figure out avenues where it might be safe and okay. And, one of these topics came up yesterday, this idea of scientists coming out about their use and being perceived as less trustworthy by the public as a result of that. Like, I think that's a really tough situation because scientists now can't be honest without lowering their reputation. And that seems tricky and problematic to me and something that folks should look at. Like, okay, now what if every psychedelic scientist just came out at once?
Right. And I guess I get it. I guess I get it from like the scientific perspective of like trying to remain pretty objective and like what type of biases could you be bringing in? But again,
they're hiding their biases.
They're hiding their biases. Yeah, that is a really great point.
Yeah. So like, what does that mean? Like if you're hiding your bias like that's a little complicated, right? Like, oh no, I don't own any stock in GlaxoSmithKline, but I'm going to write all these cool articles about their drugs, Like, right. Is that... I guess it's not necessarily the same because that's a financial interest. And for whatever reason, they're only really worried about stuff like that. Like, are you going to lie because you have a financial stake? Not, are you going to lie because you have like a lived experience of this thing?
Right. Well, I'm guessing like maybe from like public perception, if they're seeing a lot of this stuff and most of the scientists are saying like they haven't, then it's like, oh, well, they're just studying it objectively. But, I guess like maybe they've had experiences and maybe that is kind of influencing the way that they research, the way that they ask questions and research. But yeah, is kind of lying about that, I don't know, ethical?
Valid question. Also, what the fuck are ethics?
That's another conversation to have.
I guess we can get into that like later on maybe, but yeah, like it's this sweet spot balance between people and group, individuals and group. How do we do that? And yeah, well, Kyle, like it's interesting because you're training regarding ethics being kind of professional. And so like for you, ethics are like a list of rules you have to follow, right? Versus what is the sweet spot balance between, good for the individual and good for the group.
Well, I guess that comes back to like what we were exploring with Lenny a little bit, like the difference between like rule-based ethics that really, dominates professional fields versus kind of like virtue-based ethics, like Aristotelian ethics of like what's good for society, what's good for the polis, what's good for the individual.
I think the term eudaimonia, like I think the best term we ran into is well-being.
Yeah.
Like for the well-being, not necessarily happiness, but well-being. Yeah. So interesting, right? Aristotle being the first person to write extensively on ethics and politics. There's a lot there. It's way worse reading than Plato for those of you that are interested, but there's still a lot of valuable stuff there. And it's not that bad. It's just, kind of nice and neat structured arguments as opposed to any kind of beautiful language.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. What article is next? Oh, no more articles. All right. So now we're about to enter the danger zone. And let's see what we can do here. Let's see how little harm we can do and how much good we can do here. All right. So this whole COVID thing started to get really hot in March of last year. And I think Lorna Lee at Entheo Nation put out a really comprehensive article talking about the harms from ayahuasca work as it relates to a highly contagious virus like COVID. And this is before any of the variants came around. She talked about how there were, it's not just drinking ayahuasca, right? There's a whole mess of things that go along with it, from close physical contact at times, purging, coughing, sometimes like sharing nose instruments, aka things that you can apply drugs in your nose with or plants with your nose with. And yeah, sometimes sharing cups, and what this brings in ethics now. So is it and I'm not saying there's any hard and fast rules here, but I'm saying that we should engage in these things and figure out what's right and what's not right. So there's retreats offering ayahuasca sessions, both domestically and internationally. And some groups are 80 or bigger. And some of these facilities are hosting 3 or more sessions a week. Do they have the resources to do contact tracing if there's an infection? Do they believe there's a risk from the virus? Like, are they delusional as a result of, being kind of brought into groupthink and, I'm safe because of the spirit of the thing? Which in a sense, like I would love to defend that, but I don't think it's sensible or okay to do that right now because of how many people have died from this virus. It's like saying, okay, cool. Like you're going to, the spirit of ayahuasca is going to protect you from bubonic plague and like some other really gnarly viruses and diseases. Like, sure, there's awesome antiviral, antibacterial results at times from ayahuasca, but it's not perfect. And it's not the thing that's going to keep you safe. I heard rumor that there's sessions going in Spain, like small islands off of Spain, and small, like 10 or less people ayahuasca sessions is what's keeping the virus going in these places. I'm part of it. I don't think the whole thing, but there's a lot of this happening in Spain. And what do we do about that? Like I had some strong words with somebody recently about it and it didn't go well. And even celebrities that we know of or really well-known people in the psychedelic space are doing this. And, what do we do?
Yeah.
I think it's highly unethical. It's dangerous. It's malpractice in a lot of ways. If you have a license, some of these people do. And, what the fuck? I don't, what are some of your thoughts on this, Kyle?
Yeah, it's, I could see both sides, right? So I guess if we're thinking about well-being, on one side, there's a lot of people that might be struggling with their mental health. And we obviously know the increase in mental health is on the rise due to COVID, isolation. What has that been doing to people? And having the opportunity to do healing work, especially if people are at their like rope's end and they feel like it's an opportunity. So I guess to some degree, people are weighing the risk benefit of like what's good for my mental health versus maybe kind of contracting a virus. What is, yeah. And I think there are some people that, maybe that's beneficial. On the other side, I think just thinking about community and thinking about responsibility when it comes to COVID is also really important. I just heard a story at a university that a bunch of students got together for a party. So, young kids, their immune systems are good. They're probably in that, range of not really having much and probably asymptomatic. And the university had them go home to quarantine, and a bunch of the parents got sick. And then one of the students' parents ended up, I guess, passing from that incident. So there you go, from a harmless party, quote unquote, just getting together with some friends on a university campus, and then going home and your parent dies because you brought the virus into the home. And that's real, right? And I think we really have to think about community picture here of, is my travel going to affect my community in any way? Am I going to bring it back? And how does that then continue to perpetuate, viral transmission? And I don't know, it's a really hard thing because a lot of people are struggling and people are seeking, these treatments for their mental health and well-being. And then on the other side, I think, and I guess a lot of people are pandemic fatigued. People are just, kind of sick of it. And I think a lot of people are at the point where they're trying to take risks just because, we want some sense of normalcy back. But on the other side, like the actions that we do take, what type of consequences are there? And, when you're talking about magical thinking and, the spirit of ayahuasca is going to protect me, well, I guess we all have to look back into history. Did shamanistic beliefs help protect a lot of indigenous people that fell ill from a lot of the European sicknesses and disease that came over in the early years, right? So,
did prayer protect them from colonizers killing everybody?
Exactly. And that is something that we have to take into consideration about romanticizing different cultural beliefs and people, is that, I don't know, I definitely have fall into that camp at times of romanticizing different spiritual beliefs and thinking, yes, this is the way it works. But then also realizing like, hey, I mean, if we're saying that these traditions, beliefs have been around for thousands of years, well, let's look at what happened thousands of years ago. A lot of people died from illness being transmitted within those communities. And that's a real thing. And I think one thing that really stuck out was when I was talking to my one teacher when the pandemic was really kind of unfolding. And I was talking about this idea of like, I guess more the meta perspective of like, oh, we're waking up to so much shadow material, and talking about some of these ideas within the spiritual community. He really asked me, is like, check your privilege there. He's like, I know a lot of people on reservations, a lot of indigenous people on reservations, that they're not seeing this as a spiritual event at all. And, if we look at some of the hardest hit communities, a lot of indigenous communities are getting hit pretty hard. What I think like Navajo Nation got hit pretty hard. And,
I've been driving through that place a lot, and it's really, really bad. Like they're, I think, allowed to be open according to their tribal governments for like not that many hours a day, depending on which, nation you're in. And it's horrifying. And my friend is a doctor down there in Arizona. Phoenix is now treating a lot of these folks. And, because of their lack of privilege and like living in a food desert in a lot of ways, they're a lot of diabetics, a lot of asthmatics, and there's a lot of deaths. Like the death rate, I think, is higher in those communities as a result of the poorer health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there is something there. And, that came from a teacher who is, part a little, I forget what percentage is, but Cherokee, Lakota, and European ancestry. So he does, have that perspective of like saying, I think it's also important to check your privilege there as well. There are a lot of people that like have these belief systems, but they're also not seeing it as a spiritual thing, like it's a real thing that's happening. And, just because we get to maybe live a little bit isolated and have our, there's a level of safety there. We can sit there and think that it's a spiritual thing that's happening. And, we can maybe entertain that a little bit more than actual communities that are getting hit harder. And we don't get to, we're not seeing that firsthand, right? So.
And we've got to do a little bit of math too. Like ketamine is available. Therapy is available. There's drugs that are available to buy you a year. That might suck, but let's look at this. So suicide death toll, USA last year, 48,000 people. Pretty substantial.
Jeez.
How many people from COVID? 447,000. So that's 10x more deaths from COVID than suicide. So, for those who aren't suicidal, we need to look, should we be doing this? Are there other interventions we can do on a smaller scale that are maybe cheaper or less dangerous? I think the answer is yes. And what kind of bad press are we going to get as a community if this keeps going on and more people keep dying and, more strains keep coming out? Like there's this article on thedailybeast.com headline, drug ritual is biologically explosive during COVID. Some devotees don't care. And this is the kind of press that we're going to see continue if we don't address it. So I'm pretty freaked out, like my home life, like I've discussed it with you, but I don't know that I've discussed it on the show. My home life is thrashed right now as a result of COVID. So my girlfriend and I had COVID in March. She tested positive for antibodies recently. And yeah, like she's now totally disabled, not able to go to work, migraines, 4 days a week, roughly, not able to, do much. She's now on Medicare, and we have an oxygen concentrator machine with one of those kind of rubber hoses that go in the nose to help with the blood O2. It's going to be months before we can see a neurologist to see what's going on. I'm hopeful that I'll be able to stay in my apartment here with all this crazy big psychedelics today paychecks, but I'm not really feeling super optimistic, but we'll see. And for her, like we didn't even know it was really a problem at that point. Like when we got infected, we barely knew what was going on or anything about it. And now people know way more. I think there's now studies going on at a lot of hospitals. I think a hospital in Denver Jewish Hospital, is doing some long-term COVID. I think they're calling it long COVID studies. There might be some hormonal stuff. There might be actual hardcore tissue damage to the lungs and heart. So we might try to get her in with a cardiologist. So it's like, it's terrifying,
Yeah.
Like death might look better than this in some cases. If she's able to resolve it in a year, death was the worst option.
Yeah.
But, can you really just go forever not being able to do anything and like barely getting through and no meds that work? And so, I'm at the same time as I'm impacted financially by COVID, I'm also personally impacted.
Yeah.
And who's to say my personal biology isn't also compromised from COVID? Haven't had a cardiologist check me out or anything yet. So we'll see. I don't know. So
it's scary. It's really scary. I remember when what was it? Yeah, February, end of February, March, when you said you came down with that. I mean, that was scary. I'm like, oh shit. Like this it didn't sound good.
Sickest I've ever been. It was crazy.
Yeah. And, my old roommate was interviewed. I forget what publication it was, but, he had very long-term, I think he got sick back in March too. And he ended up having very kind of prolonged symptoms, couldn't work for months, talked about like just this like post-viral fatigue syndrome, post-viral like nerve damage. And, that's scary when you start to, I guess, know people in your own life. And, I've started to know people around in this area of my life that have passed from it. So, it's a real thing. And I don't know,
And maybe a thing that we haven't talked about in a while that's important to mention is because so many people are in the ICU and on ventilators for treating their COVID symptoms, keeping them alive. ICUs are essentially not available in most cities in the US and probably internationally. So if we get in a car accident, who's to say we're going to be able to get the treatment that would typically be available to us? And I remember Mitch Gomez saying this, like, treat it like you're on an adventure in India or something. Like, try to be really safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, so on the positive side here, which it's going to be kind of mitigated positivity, but some of these centers are doing COVID tests as you enter the facility, but they're still mask optional when you get in. There's plenty of failures on COVID tests. If you're there for multiple days on like a international retreat, perhaps what would be better is daily testing for both, temperature and virus presence or antibody presence or whatever it is. And, perhaps daily would help. And like, does your organization have a contact tracing plan? Even if you have a contact tracing plan and testing, like that doesn't mean that people aren't going to die as a result of you doing this. And I don't want to like be such a doomer, but it's just, I didn't choose for this virus to come out.
I don't think anybody did.
Yeah. Did you watch the South Park, by the way? COVID South Park?
The pandemic special?
Oh my God. Yeah. I don't want to comment because it's not safe for work, but for those of you that checked it out, it's a good commentary.
I watched it a few months ago when it came out.
I know some doctors that appreciated it that have dealt with a lot of death from COVID. They're like, yeah, this is about right. Yeah. And, us being close to a lot of medical providers, like we get a different slant than a lot of people do. Like if you're not hanging out with 10 doctors like semi-regularly, your picture of this is going to be really different. So like I remember some of the early stories. I'm like, wait, what? What's happening? I knew it was a real big situation when Iran started digging mass graves in like February. That was like a real trigger for me. It's like, yeah, mass graves aren't really something that people like to do. And that means something fucked up's happening. And one of my friends working in New York City told me that they had big 18-wheelers refrigerated just for dead bodies, just parked right outside their hospital in Manhattan. And to me, that's horrifying. What do we do with that? And, this is New York City. It's one of the richest cities in the world. And the fact that this is happening there it should be earth shattering to folks. Yeah. Anyway, maybe I'm beating it to death a little too much. But I still think it's a really important topic. I don't.
Yeah. I mean, we're not out of it yet.
Right. Like this is harm reduction.
Yeah.
People are still going to do drugs and take risks. Sorry for calling ayahuasca a drug, but it's for simplicity's sake. And just calculate your risks really carefully. Like if you're going to go do that, maybe make a safety plan to get a COVID test 8 days later and not to see anybody after for a while.
Yeah.
How can you minimize the downstream risk from the risk that you take as an individual? And how do you minimize the risks you take as an individual? Yeah. So, it's not that you're going to kill your other 30-year-old buddy. It's that you might kill their 65-year-old father or mother or grandparents in their 90s. Like my grandma's 96. Like I think she just finally got the vaccine.
Oh, nice.
But it's horrifying that she hasn't had it.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot here. It's an emotionally charged topic. Like how do we I think one of the tricks is how do we all right, you notice that you're being passionate about a topic. How do we step back, hit pause, be a little rational for a little while? And this happens all over the place in the psychedelic world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just look at Decrim Nature, for instance, and like how that kind of flares up once in a while.
Yeah.
Get dispassionate for a little bit, figure it out, and then figure out a tactic for being effective in the way you want to be effective. That's safe and appropriate. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important topic. And I don't know, just hearing that other story about the university thing of just getting together and hearing that impact. Like, I also imagine like the guilt too. And it just had me think about just like our responsibility to our communities. And as such an individualistic culture, like I sometimes don't think we think about community. It's like, oh, I need to think about like my own needs and whatnot, but also thinking about, the potential risks that we are bringing to our communities by our actions. Just something to consider and to think about. But yeah, I mean, after hearing that story, I was just like, oh shit, I can't imagine like what that student felt like. And, was that a decision like also the university, right? It's like, could they have had a different protocol if they knew everybody got tested or tested positive for COVID? Could they have isolated on the dorms and come up with a protocol instead of having them go back home to like people that are older and possibly more susceptible?
Their families. It's so
like
crazy.
That just seemed kind of crazy. Like, or get a hotel for like if they didn't want it on campus, like could you? I don't know. Yeah, it's what other options are there. So, things to think about. So yeah, if you are, engaging in any of this work and you live with people, could you quarantine, self-isolate for a little bit just to minimize that risk? And I think that's just what it comes down to, right? Like risk management and harm reduction. How are we reducing harm to ourselves, others, and our larger community here? And we're all in it together. It sucks. We've all made sacrifices. We've all lost a lot, whether that's people in our lives, relationships that have just kind of like suffered with that lack of connection, mental health, job, financials. I mean, we've all been, it's been a crazy year. I mean, it's really been insane.
Right. It's not something to trivialize, and it's something to take quite seriously. And, maybe let's propose some alternatives. Okay, so you're going to go to an ayahuasca session. Like maybe there's an alternative for you. Maybe getting together and, taking some education, reading some books on how to do some harm reduction and plan your stuff. Maybe it's a better option to do that with a close friend with LSD for $8 versus paying, $5 to $1,000 for an ayahuasca session. There's a lot less exposure. There's less travel, less climate impact. There's a lot of benefits to that. Though I don't want to say that you should do this if you're in like acute clinical risk. Like if you really, really need help, you should be still with a professional right now if you can afford it. Like therapists are doing a lot of work telehealth wise, and some people are even getting together with masks on to do talk therapy, right? I feel a little goofy about that, but if that's what people need, it should be there, right? Not everybody has a phone that does video yet.
Yeah. And I don't know, it brings up like interesting points about like new innovation and I guess risk benefit. We've been pretty vocal about like online breath work. And, I've done some small sessions with people I've developed a relationship with and really kind of carved out extra time and kind of did one-on-one attention just so I'm not doing these big groups and just opening people up and letting them go. But also like, ketamine online therapy and some of these new innovations that have popped up and emerged and kind of doing that risk benefit analysis and being like, if we are dealing with this mental health crisis that's unfolding, and, I think we all agree that doing in-person work is ideal for a lot of this stuff. But, could we have some of these alternative models, even though, it poses some potential harm, not having, maybe safety measures in place, not knowing what somebody's going to do. I mean, you don't have really any control over somebody just virtually, but, is the option available? And like, could we be somewhat benefiting somebody's mental health in this crisis? So I don't know, things to consider as well.
Right. Like MDMA is pretty safe most of the time. It's a little bit safer than riding a horse. Ketamine's pretty safe. So like what are the things that might be able to just buy you time? Like I think we should consider this like if like because of social isolation, all the pressures right now, like there's a chance that a lot of people won't heal right now. But can we make palliative measures just to make you feel better to buy time till you are able to heal later on? And, keep in mind this stuff isn't legal yet, right? Like this is largely people are operating in black markets and there's a lot of risk just because of that. So yeah, like what can you do that's maybe safer? So consider that. Like, yeah, ayahuasca is really cool. It's like getting a lot of attention. It's really neat. Like there's this magical component where the shaman's going to do some magic to you. It's great. But is it okay to wait a year and try something that's cheaper and easier, more available? Food for thought.
And I mean, I think we both have put a lot of stuff on pause, and it's been really, really challenging. And, there's so many times I want to, I was talking to a friend about like, man, like I really wish like I could do breath work or, engage in some of this other work at times. And it's just like, I don't feel safe. I mean, being immunocompromised and living with other people that like are a little bit high risk. And I think about that all the time. It's like, if I went out and caught the virus and had to come back to this environment and somebody got sick, like I'd feel so fucking guilty. I don't know. And it's like, I don't know, how could I, but again, I'm not in total social isolation. Like thankfully I'm with people in a house. So I think, that helps, but I can't imagine what people are going through that are living alone, that don't have,
100% solo has to be really weird.
Oh my God, I can't imagine.
Like it's just me and my girlfriend here for the most part. And it's, it gets trying.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to really help us appreciate our communities more when we come out.
Yeah.
Like I cannot wait to see so many different people. And it's really only going to happen once we're post-vaccine, I think. I need to learn more about like implications of the vaccine. I think I'm not understanding things based on some of the language I've seen around it, but I do want to see like, okay, cool. Like if 20 of us have the vaccine, is that cool to get together and do breath work or have a small conference? Like what's the number? Like, is it safe? Like when would it be safe? So there's things there to think about.
Right. Like does the vaccine actually cut down on transmission, or kind of like what the, I don't know. I was thinking like,
I've heard some rumors, but I don't know anything about it.
Yeah. I mean, I could imagine maybe something like the flu, like, getting the flu vaccine doesn't cut down on transmission, maybe cuts to some degree, maybe it does. But also, I mean, I've gotten the flu vaccine, I've gotten the flu, but it definitely decreased the severity of the flu. And would that be the same thing with this? You get exposed to the COVID virus, but, maybe your body doesn't completely, your body is able to have that immune response to fight it off. So maybe you get a little sick, but that doesn't mean it cuts down transmission, right? Maybe you could still expose somebody. I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So my wants and needs, like I just want this shit over. And what we have to do to get there is a lot of vaccination, a lot of careful, self-quarantine and just being really careful to not transmit. And hopefully we can go to some concerts at some point in 2021. Yeah. So, or whatever we want to do, right? Do some breath work, get together with some friends for a weekend camping somewhere. Like these things can come back if we're really careful, but it's like such a big collective thing. How much impact do we as individuals really have? And I guess like we could infect hundreds of people in a day if we had it. So,
yeah, I mean, you ever see those studies of somebody like going to work with it and then the whole company gets it or half the company gets it?
Right. Yeah. That's why a lot of companies are not having offices right now.
Yeah.
All right. So feeling pretty good about that topic. Yeah. So we're doing a book giveaway right now. PCal and TCal, Sasha and Ann Shulgin. They're classics. You can find that at psychedelicstoday.com/welcome. The more you share it, the better your chances are to win it. I think we give that away. We select a winner, not this Friday, but next Friday. So get in there, check it out. It's the first link on the page. And what else is going on? There's going to be some more giveaways too. Like I'm pretty excited about these giveaway partnerships we're doing.
Yeah.
More from Synergetic sooner than later.
Sweet. We have some upcoming classes outside of navigating psychedelics for clinicians and therapists. We have a class called Mind Bending, Mind Mending, a series on the neuroscience of psychedelics. And this will be on Monday, February 22nd. I think I have that right. And I believe that's at 7 or 7:30. You can learn more at, we'll have it up on our website. You can check that out. $10 to get in. And We're just still waiting for CE approval for that. And so hopefully that will be CE approved. We also have a course coming up for students. So we get a lot of requests for students for our clinician and therapist class and some undergrad students. So we figured we put together a class. This is going to be co-taught by Alyssa Gursky. You might recognize her from some of our previous podcasts. And I think we're also going to have one of our employees, Rob, join us as well. Thanks, Rob. I know it's going to be exciting for you to join in there. But, it's going to be a 5-week online course, and kind of similar. You'll get the Navigating Psychedelics Lessons on Self-Care and Integration course, but also really kind of the classroom time will also be a time to explore ways to get involved in the field and just, really kind of navigating this. As somebody that's curious, you don't have to be a student, but, also geared to students as well. If you're, trying to navigate how to get involved, figure out, study opportunities, that will be kicking off in March 2. I don't know if I have the dates off the top of my head right now.
Where can people find links to it?
I believe March 2nd, Tuesday. You can go to psychedeliceducationcenter.com, and then you'll follow that to, it should be one of the first classes up there, Navigating Psychedelics for Students and the Psychedelic Curious. And then we also, we're going to be doing a free webinar with Johanna Hilla and Maria Papasora for a Jungian course. I don't have the links up yet, but we'll get that up. You can check that out at psychedelicstoday.com and click the little tab courses, and that should bring you there when we get that up there. So yeah, we'll be exploring Jung and the feminine, and yeah, excited for that one. That will be March 15th.
Cool. Yeah, what else do we have going on? Oh, a film screening. February 12th. So it's kind of like a hybrid film screening. So you rent the film, watch it on your own, and then come and watch or have a conversation with the filmmaker, through Q&A. I'll be moderating. I think we're going to have one of the primary actors from the film Light Years there.
Cool.
And the main filmmaker, director Colin Thompson. And I think maybe one of the other folks too. So it could be 3 of the filmmakers talking about this pretty cool psychedelic film. Did you have a chance to watch it yet?
I skimmed through it. I didn't watch the whole thing. I should go back, but I know that they filmed it in Vermont and parts of Burlington, right? So I definitely want to check it out.
Yeah, you having exposure there, I think that's
it
would be cool for you. You'd probably remember a bunch of stuff. It's a neat film. I had a great time recording with Colin. Like I said before, I was probably a little too stoned watching the movie, so it was a little stressful, but my girlfriend loved it. And I really enjoyed it too. I just wish I was a little less high. But it was cool. Really, really neat way of exploring psychedelic use without kind of going over the top, like Midnight Gospel style, So pretty neat. And I'm excited for that. Panel is free. You can rent the film for probably somewhere between $3 and $6. And if you go to our blog page, psychedelicstoday.com/blog, you'll see the link there, and there's all different places where you can rent it. Sweet. So whatever works for you, and love to see you there. Again, that's free. We've got this clergy project going. So we're hoping to get maybe 20 clergy together. So, Christian focused purely from simplicity's sake. There's other groups doing stuff with Judaism and Islam, and there's going to be a large set of projects going on related to religion. So this is just kind of an introductory project to get people kind of up to speed who are clergy or might be interested to understand psychedelics better. My real hope is that people can understand psychedelics to the point where they could figure out ways in which they could integrate psychedelics to their practice of religion and maybe bring it to their people eventually, or at least try to turn on other clergy in some way, in a safe way. So where can you find out about that? It's on our Facebook page. I do have a landing page somewhere on our website. It'll be in the show notes. It's actually psychedelicstoday.com/connecting-clergy, but we'll have a link to that in the show notes. So lots happening. There's going to be even more happening. There's a really cool legal project I'm working on with a number of attorneys, and you'll hear more about that soon. And are we missing anything else?
I think that might be it. Yeah. A lot of things going on. It's exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. And yeah, navigating psychedelics for clinicians and therapists. Again, that starts in March, and there's we're probably at about half capacity now. So if you want to be there, sign up soon, so you don't miss a spot. And you can learn more at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And we're happy to answer questions. Cool.
All right.
So
thank you, everybody.
That's it. Yeah. Thank you all. And we'll see you on Tuesday. See you next Tuesday. Joe and Kyle signing off for Psychedelics Today. See y'all later.
Take care.